Emma Rodriguez had always been the kind of person who noticed small details that others missed. As a nurse from Madrid visiting London for the first time, her caring nature and professional instincts were always alert to signs that someone might need help or comfort. On this particular gray November morning, she stood outside Buckingham Palace with her elderly father, Miguel, who had dreamed of visiting London since he was a young boy. At 78 years old, this trip was likely his last chance to see the world beyond Spain. And Emma was determined to make every moment special for him. The royal guard standing nearest to them appeared to be in his early 20s, with the familiar red uniform and towering bearskin hat that had become synonymous with British tradition. But Emma, with her trained eye for human behavior, noticed something that the other tourists seemed to miss entirely. The young guard's face was pale, almost ashen, and there was a slight tremor in his hands that only someone with medical training would recognize. Small beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead, despite the cool autumn air, and his breathing seemed slightly labored. "Papa, look at that young man," Emma whispered to her father in Spanish, nodding discreetly toward the guard.
Something
"Is not right with him." Miguel squinted through his thick glasses and studied the guard for a moment. "He looks fine to me, Mia. They all look the same in those fancy uniforms." But Emma's nursing instincts were rarely wrong. She had spent 15 years working in hospital emergency departments, and she had learned to recognize the early signs of medical distress that others might dismiss as nervousness or fatigue. Guard, whose name was Private Timothy Walsh, and who had been serving for only 6 months, was indeed struggling. He had been fighting off what he thought was a minor illness for the past 2 days, but this morning he had woken up feeling significantly worse. His pride and sense of duty had prevented him from reporting sick, especially since he was still relatively new and wanted to prove himself reliable. Emma watched with growing concern as the young man's condition seemed to deteriorate before her eyes. She could see him swaying almost imperceptibly, and the way he was gripping his rifle suggested he was using it for support rather than just ceremonial positioning. "I think he needs help," she told her father, her voice filled with the professional concern that had guided her career. Emma's medical training told her that the guard was showing early signs of what could be heat exhaustion, dehydration, or possibly something more serious. Despite her father's protests that they shouldn't interfere, she couldn't ignore her professional instincts. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching the guard with the calm, reassuring manner she used with patience. "I am a nurse from Spain. Are you feeling all right? You look like you might need some water or to sit down for a moment." "A bit." Walsh heard her words, but his training dictated that he remain silent and motionless. However, the concern in her voice and the fact that she had identified herself as a medical professional created a conflict between his military discipline and his growing awareness that something was indeed wrong with his physical condition. Emma noticed that the guard's eyes flickered toward her briefly, and she took this as acknowledgement that he had heard her offer of help. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a bottle of water, holding it where he could see it. "I know you cannot speak or move," she continued quietly, "but if you need help, please find a way to let me know. I have experience with medical emergencies." Other tourists had begun to notice the interaction, and some were pulling out their phones to record what they assumed was another attempt to make a royal guard break character. The growing attention made Emma uncomfortable, as she had no interest in creating a spectacle. She was simply responding to what appeared to be a medical situation. Miguel tugged gently on his daughter's arm. "Emma, people are staring. Maybe we should leave him alone." But Emma's professional training wouldn't allow her to walk away from someone who might be in distress. She had taken an oath to help people in need, and that commitment didn't change just because she was on vacation in a foreign country. Private Walsh, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly aware that his condition was worsening. The combination of fighting off illness, standing motionless for extended periods, and the weight of his uniform and equipment was taking a toll that he hadn't anticipated. Emma's offer of water seemed incredibly appealing, but accepting help would mean breaking protocol in front of tourists and colleagues. The small crowd that had gathered was growing larger, the people assuming they were about to witness either a touching moment or an embarrassing breach of royal guard protocol. What happened next caught everyone completely off guard. as Emma stood there with the water bottle, still trying to figure out how to help the guard without causing him professional embarrassment. Private Walsh suddenly began to sway more noticeably. Emma's medical instincts kicked into high gear as she recognized the signs of an imminent collapse. Without hesitation, she dropped her backpack and moved closer to the guard, positioning herself to catch him if necessary. "Sir, you need to sit down immediately," she said with the authority of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. "You're about to faint." Private Walsh tried to maintain his composure, but his body was betraying him. It's the illness he had been fighting, combined with dehydration and the physical demands of his duty, had reached a critical point. His vision was beginning to blur, and he could feel his legs becoming unsteady. The crowd of tourists realized this was no longer entertainment. Something was genuinely wrong. Several people started murmuring with concern, while others continued filming, unsure whether this was part of some planned event or a real emergency. Emma made a decision that would change the entire situation. She stepped directly in front of the guard and spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "This man needs medical attention. I am a registered nurse, and I am going to help him whether it breaks protocol or not." Miguel watched with a mixture of pride and worry as his daughter took charge of the situation with the same professional competence he had seen her display countless times in Spanish hospitals. At that moment, Private Walsh's knees buckled slightly, and Emma immediately reached out to steady him. The physical contact between a tourist and a royal guard sent gasps through the crowd, as everyone knew this was strictly forbidden. "Easy now," Emma said softly, supporting his weight. Just breathe slowly and let me help you." The touch of her hand and the sound of her calm, professional voice seemed to give Private Walsh permission to acknowledge his condition. For the first time since taking his post that morning, he spoke. "I don't feel very well," he admitted quietly, his voice barely audible to anyone except Emma. "I know," she replied gently. "We're going to take care of you." The moment Private Walsh spoke and accepted Emma's help, everything changed rapidly. Other guards who had been monitoring the situation from a distance immediately began moving toward them. And palace security personnel appeared from positions that most tourists hadn't even noticed. Emma found herself surrounded by uniformed officials, all speaking at once and demanding to know what was happening. The crowd had grown significantly, and the atmosphere had shifted from curious entertainment to genuine concern and confusion. "Step away from the guard immediately," commanded a senior officer who appeared to be in charge of Palace security. Emma looked up at him with the steady confidence of someone who had dealt with authority figures in medical situations many times before. "I am a registered nurse, and this young man is experiencing what appears to be heat exhaustion or dehydration. He needs immediate medical attention, not protocol enforcement." The security officer looked uncertain, caught between established procedures and the obvious medical emergency unfolding before him. Private Walsh was now leaning heavily on Emma's support, and his condition was clearly deteriorating. "We have our own medical personnel," the officer said, but Emma could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Where are they?" Emma asked pointedly. "Because this man needs help right now, and I am qualified to provide it." Miguel watched the confrontation with growing anxiety, worried that his daughter's good intentions were about to get them both in serious trouble with British authorities. The crowd around them had grown to over 50 people, many of whom were recording the unprecedented scene at that moment. Private Walsh swayed again, and this time Emma wasn't able to keep him completely upright. He began to sink toward the ground, and Emma guided his descent to prevent him from falling hard onto the pavement. "Someone call for medical assistance?" she called out loudly, then turned her attention back to the guard. "Can you hear me?" "What's your name, Timothy?" he whispered, his eyes unfocused. "Okay, Timothy, I'm Emma. I'm a nurse, and I'm going to take care of you. Can you tell me how long you've been feeling unwell?" The sight of a royal guard sitting on the ground being attended to by a Spanish tourist created a surreal scene that none of the onlookers had ever imagined witnessing. As Emma knelt beside Private Walsh, checking his pulse and monitoring his breathing, the situation took another unexpected turn. Palace medical personnel finally arrived on the scene, but instead of taking over immediately, the lead medic assessed Emma's actions and recognized professional competence when he saw it. "Are you medical personnel?" asked Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the palace's senior medical officer. "Yes, I'm a nurse from Madrid. 15 years of emergency department experience," Emma replied without looking up from her patient. "He's got a weak but steady pulse. He's responsive but disoriented. And he's been fighting off illness for at least 2 days based on what he just told me." Dr. Mitchell knelt down beside Emma and began her own assessment. "His temperature is elevated, and he shows signs of dehydration. You've been managing this correctly." The security officer who had initially demanded Emma step away now looked uncertain about how to proceed. The medical emergency had superseded normal protocol, and it was clear that Emma's intervention had potentially prevented a more serious incident. "Timothy," Dr. Mitchell said to the guard, "we're going to get you some fluids and get you cooled down. This lady probably saved you from a much worse situation." Private Walsh, who was beginning to feel slightly better now that he was sitting down and had accepted some water, looked up at Emma with gratitude mixed with embarrassment. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I should have reported sick this morning, but I didn't want to let anyone down." Emma smiled at him with the warmth she showed all her patients. "Sometimes taking care of yourself is the most responsible thing you can do. Your colleagues would much rather have you healthy than have you collapse on duty." The crowd that had gathered watched in fascination as the medical situation unfolded. Many people were moved by Emma's quick response and professional care, and several approached Miguel to express their admiration for his daughter's actions. "She's always been like this," Miguel told them proudly in his broken English. "Even as a little girl, she wanted to help everyone." As Dr. Mitchell and her team prepared to transport Private Walsh for further medical evaluation, she turned to Emma with professional respect. "Thank you for your quick action. Your assessment and initial care were exactly what the situation required." But the biggest surprise was yet to come. As the medical team prepared to leave with Private Walsh, Dr. Mitchell approached Emma with an unexpected proposal that would shock everyone present. "I don't know what your plans are for the rest of your visit to London," Dr. Mitchell said, "but would you be interested in a brief tour of our medical facilities here at the palace? We rarely get the chance to meet international medical professionals, especially ones who demonstrate such excellent emergency response skills." Emma looked at her father in amazement. A private tour of the palace medical facilities was not something any tourist could expect, regardless of their professional background. But Dr. Mitchell wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'd like to arrange for you to meet some of our medical staff. We're always interested in learning about emergency procedures from different countries, and I think there could be valuable exchange of knowledge." The security officer, who had initially been concerned about protocol violations, now stepped forward with his own surprising announcement. "Given the exceptional circumstances and your professional response to a medical emergency, we would also like to arrange for you and your father to receive a special commendation from palace administration." Miguel looked at his daughter with tears in his eyes. What had started as a simple gesture of concern for a young guard's well-being had turned into recognition and opportunities that neither of them could have imagined. Private Walsh, who was feeling much better after receiving fluids and medical attention, insisted on thanking Emma personally before being transported for further evaluation. "You saw what I was trying to hide from everyone else," he said. "Your kindness and professional skill probably prevented me from serious injury." As the crowd began to disperse, many tourists approached Emma to express their admiration for her actions. Several people mentioned that they had witnessed the entire incident and were impressed by her willingness to help someone in need. Regardless of protocol or potential consequences, the story of Emma's simple gesture of offering water to a guard in distress transformed into something much larger, a demonstration of how professional competence, human compassion, and quick thinking could turn a potential disaster into an opportunity for international goodwill. 3 days later, Emma and Miguel received a formal letter from palace administration thanking Emma for her professional response and inviting both of them to return for a private meeting with senior medical staff. The simple act of noticing that someone needed help had opened doors that would create lasting memories and professional connections that would benefit Emma's career for years to come. Private Walsh recovered completely and returned to duty, but he never forgot the Spanish nurse who had recognized his distress and responded with such professional care and personal kindness.